Last time I showed you how I build one of these monster valveless pulse jet engines, but before I put this on anything, I want to know how much power is this thing really putting out. So today I'm building a proper test stand to measure the thrust and finally get some real numbers. This engine should be putting out 85 pounds of thrust, but will it actually deliver? Let's find out.
Every good project starts with an idea, and although I do have a pretty good idea how this is going to go down and what needs to happen, there's going to be a lot of improvisation here and there. But I have gathered most of the materials that I need, so I guess let's just get to it. I need to mount these axles somewhere, and instead of just welding them to the outside of the tube, I think putting them inside the tube would look nice. This should be as simple as making some mounting plates that'll fit on the outside of the tube and also on the inside of the tube to help give it more support. To make things easier, I'll just weld each set together, that way I can work on all four of them at the same time. I'll grind the first set so they fit inside the tube. Now I can mark the center line and start drilling holes. After grinding the spot welds off of these, they glue apart pretty easily with a little chisel. It is probably completely unnecessary and overkill, but I noticed that the little plates were not sitting flush up against the head of the bolt, so I just took a grinder and put a little chamfer on each hole. Apparently the welder has to be turned on for it to work. These turned out pretty good. Didn't take as long as I thought. To give these axles more stability, I ended up marking and drilling a little hole in the side of the tube so I could weld them from the outside. Now we'll just make sure each one fits well enough. That one looks pretty good. Well, I'll be. That one fits too. Almost like I planned this. You can see here I took my time and knocked these out in about 13 seconds. Hey, since you've made it this far, and while you watch me put all these tubes together into some sort of base, now would be a great time to subscribe to the channel and maybe like the video. If you're on the fence, think of it kind of like an investment. Realistically, there's going to be a pretty good chance that the next video is going to be even more awesome than this video, and each subsequent video would be even better than the one before. So please consider subscribing and you won't miss out on any future pulsejet builds or other crazy things I come up with. Plus there's a pretty good chance I probably will catch on fire eventually, so there's always that too. Okay, enough of that. Now back to me trying to make it look like I know what I'm doing. I was never very good at skateboarding, and this is probably a bad idea, but I just couldn't help myself. Mocking up these fuel tanks and the air tank seemed like the next best thing to do. Here's a reenactment of me trying to figure out what to do next, and honestly, I'm pretty sure I'm not thinking about the thrust stand, but I'm thinking about nachos or something, so I don't know what was going on here, but eventually I got up and started working again. I figured it'd be a pretty good idea to put the engine in place as to kind of where I want it so I could figure out how the rest of this is going to go. I want the engine as low as possible, but now I've realized that I can't have it too low, otherwise these straps will hit. I suppose I'll come back to that later, but for now I'm just going to start working on the upper linear rail mounts. I had about 7.5 feet of that 2-inch square barrel left over from making the base, so to make it easy I just cut that in half. Somewhere on this table there's a flat spot, I just have to find it. That should work. With a little bit of luck, not only will these rails be flat to the table, but also parallel to each other. I found some random tube lying in the corner of the shop and cut 2 pieces exactly 9 inches long. These tubes will tie the rail supports together. It didn't take long to square everything up and make sure everything measured out right. Even though I cut these center spacers to the T exactly at 9 inches long, somehow during the trip from the saw over to the table, this one shrank a little bit, so it needed a little shim. After triple checking everything and making a few minor adjustments, it's about ready for welding. Ideally, I would just clamp this down to stop it from moving, but since I'm restricted to using the center of the table, I'm going to have to get a little creative. I quickly came to the conclusion that I would just use the heaviest and most mobile, well, sort of mobile object in my shop to hold it down while I tacked everything together. Finally, those years of eating poorly are starting to pay off. After I got everything tacked together, I went ahead and welded the rest of it up, knowing that the ends would probably pull in a little bit. So after a quick check with my straight edge, it confirmed my suspicions, and each end was off about 1/16 of an inch or more. So I used one of my better skills of hitting things with a hammer to straighten each end out. After a few precisely placed whacks with a hammer on each end, I had everything lined up pretty good. I got these linear rails so that when I mount the engine, everything should run as smooth as possible. So now it's time to mount these linear rails to the top of these tubes, but as you can see, they are a little short. For some reason, I had the great idea of saving $50 and getting short ones instead of the proper sized ones, and I thought I'd just cut them in half and separate them, since it only needs to move 2 or 3 inches anyways. Honestly, this really isn't the situation that I should be using to save $50. I know for a fact that lining up now 4 pieces of rail all together within a thousandth of an inch or two is going to be a minor nightmare. But I've come this far, so I'll just keep pushing on. I told myself I should probably wrap these carriers in some plastic bags or something to stop grit from getting in there, but I forgot. Yeah, that was kind of cringy. I'll spare you from having to see the other one. Since the tubes are mostly lined up with each other, I'll just use a square to line each rail up with the edge of the tube. Then it's just a matter of transfer punching the holes, drilling, tapping, and bolting them up, and we'll see if we can get everything lined up properly. To line these rails up, I'll be using this test indicator on this articulating arm, but as you can see, it doesn't exactly reach. To fix this annoying problem, I came up with this test indicator magnetic articulating arm extension plate. Patent pending. I fussed around lining these rails up for about 5-10 minutes. As you can see, except for right here where it goes off screen, that it is lined up pretty good. I quickly came to the conclusion that if I move this high-low tank up to the front of the rig, it should give me plenty of room to open up these clamps. For reasons unknown, sometimes I just can't do things the simple way. I got it in my head that these front uprights had to be at some sort of forward angle, which of course makes them look cooler, but completely unnecessary. And since I don't have a proper bandsaw, I had to come up with this weird jerry-rigged thing to get the angles the same.
So these uprights turned out pretty good, but I'm a little concerned that if we just weld them to these upper rails, it's going to tweak it again, and I'm going to have to hit it with a hammer again to get it straight. And I don't feel like doing that again because it might be a little trickier next time after it's all together. So I think what I'm going to do is end up cutting a couple plates out for each side, and we'll just bolt it together. We'll weld it to the upright, and we'll weld it at the bottom. We'll bolt it up here. That way we don't tweak it too bad. absolutely hate? I hate cutting parts out with a grinder. It's messy, it's loud, and it kind of stinks. For reasons I've been able to fathom, nobody has sent me a plasma table for me to review yet. I'd love to say that today's video has been sponsored by and they've sent me a new CNC plasma table, but unfortunately today's sponsor is despair and sadness. But I'm not picky when picking sponsors. I could use a new bandsaw perhaps. This air compressor is practically a death trap. Even this glass of scotch is getting a little bit low. I do love a glass of scotch at the end of the day. But I guess for now, I'll just get back to grinding. So I've been fiddling with getting these rails lined up, and for the most part, it's gone okay. In about 20 minutes, I was able to get these rails lined up pretty close in both planes. Unfortunately, I am going to have to shim some of these, so I'm going to have to invest in some proper shims, not a piece of sandpaper like I have here. So I'm going to order up a set of shims for these, but in the meantime, I've got some other things I'm going to weld to this. I need to make some sort of frame to mount the engine to that rides on these rails. And since I'm going to be welding things to these uprights, things might shift a little bit. So this is just a preliminary test. So I'm fairly confident that some shims, and maybe I should just hit it with a hammer again. Well, we'll see about that. We'll get these all lined up just the way I want them.
And since I'm still trying to wrap my head around how to make the engine frame carrier thingamajig, I thought I'd do something a little more mindless and mount the fuel tanks and air tank.
Originally, I was going to build a angle iron frame to connect all four of these rails, but I had an epiphany. Instead of having to worry about the front rails and the back rails lining up absolutely perfectly, I thought, hey, why don't I just make a mount here for these two rails and a mount here for these two rails, and the mount for the engine can connect them. I know this might not make sense, but I promise I'm fairly probably sure it'll be fine, so we're just going to go with it. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut a couple pieces of angle iron to span the distance between these two rails. Then I need to weld these together. Okay, now we just have to carefully mark out where these holes on these rail carriers are on the angle iron and get them drilled out. Well, I'm glad I checked that because that does not line up. Carefully mark out. I guess it's good I didn't drill the holes yet. Something about measuring twice. I don't think I did that. Well, it's an easy enough fix. Alright, that's looking pretty good. And doing the angle iron like this where it flares out, it provides a shield for that rail carrier so that the heat doesn't hit to it, because there's some plastic parts on there that might melt. But for now, I think this is going to work pretty good. So pretty important next thing I need to work on is what happens if the rails come all the way to the end. I need to stop this from flying off one way or the other. So I found this bumper material on Amazon. I think it's for a boat or something. So this should act pretty good as a stop and a buffer, because it'll give a little bit if it's hit hard. So I need to cut this down to size, drill some holes in this tube, and we'll mount them on each side of this tube that's just below the carrier. So now to connect the slidey bit to the bumpers, we'll need a piece of tubing that we can put up underneath here and weld up, and then we can put some vertical bits on the end of that so that it hits up against the bumpers. Okay, now that I've got these made, I've got it clamped up there, and I've just got it to the side so the clamp doesn't hit the bumpers, and I've lined it up just how I want it. So I'm going to mark it on both sides, and I can line everything up and weld this permanently.
So I want to put the support arm here, but wouldn't you know it, someone had a great idea of putting these uprights at an angle. So I had to get a little creative notching these out to get it to fit straight. This support beam will serve a few different purposes, one of which is to hold a swingable arm that will hold all my controls.
So at the end of this arm, I need to figure out how to mount some switches for the control panel. I found this scrap aluminum plate, so I'll hack this up and make a little control panel out of it. So I'm going to mount this battery box right about here, but I think it needs another support, so I'm going to cut a piece of tube that goes from this down to here. So we're at the part of this build where I've got to figure out how is this machine actually going to work. How is it going to measure thrust? I purchased this giant fish scale. It goes up to 440 pounds. That should work pretty good. So now I have to figure out where is this going to go. To avoid mounting this scale up in here, right up under the engine where I can't see it nor does it fit, I've decided to use a pulley to transfer the pull from these slidey raily things through a cable around and back over to a position where I can actually see it. But since I made these rails independent of each other so that they wouldn't bind at all and they would roll freely, I have two separate bumpers for each direction. I'm going to have to change that. There's no room for this pulley in between these two rails as they slide back and forth. So I think what I'm going to have to do is make these a little less independent. I'm going to add this turnbuckle to the top so that I can cut this bottom section off so that they're still connected. They really only need the one set of bumpers, but they'll still articulate so they don't bind up at all. Now we just need a bracket for this pulley. I made two places where I can set the preload for the scale. One right here, and the other one right here. And I can tighten this up, which will take the slack out of the line, and then adjust this fancy knob to get it to 0 before I do any testing. Now that I got these rails lined up pretty good, I need to finish my engine mounts, get everything else connected, and we'll be ready to test fire this thing and see how much power it really puts out.
Now I've got to get this thing out of here, and unfortunately I have never finished the doors that go in this doorway, so I'm going to have to somehow cram it in through this one.
Alright, I've double checked everything. Everything's ready to go. Let's fire this thing up and see what kind of thrust it really puts out. I'm looking forward to at least 85 pounds. That's what my calculations told me, so let's see what happens. Wow, that was insane. That completely exceeded my expectations. That put out over 100 pounds of thrust, maybe pushing 110. Just phenomenal. So this test stands worked absolutely perfect. It's just what I need for some of the larger projects, pulsejet projects that I already have in the works. So we'll be able to test and get proper measurements. If we do any modifications, we will see if we can get increase in power by doing some different things, testing different fuels, that sort of thing. It clearly showed this engine is putting out over 100 pounds of thrust, which is just insane. If you want to see what kind of vehicle I build, put this pulsejet on, like and subscribe. That's coming up soon. But I'm not done with this engine yet. I've got some ideas to make an insane more power with this engine. So stay tuned. That's coming up next video. Again, my name is Zach. This is Building Stuff. Thanks for stopping by, and hopefully I've inspired you to get out and build something.